Okay, Joaquin, take it away.
All righty. Thank you, Gretchen, and thank you everyone for your patience. Good evening and welcome to this month's meeting and Marianne, I have to say, we've changed our name yet again to not only just community engagement, but the Community Engagement Committee, which apparently is more appropriate for what we do here. So no longer the
Love it.
task force. But thank you all the same for coming to this month's meeting of the Community Engagement Committee. I see that we do have quorum, unless I'm mistaken. And I'd like to welcome our two guests, Professor Bradshaw and Linnell. Good to see you as always. Let's go ahead and introduce ourselves because that's what we do here. I'll go first. My name is Joaquin, and I am a chair of this committee and a member of the Human Rights Commission and a resident of Ward 8. So, Kathy, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself too?
Hi, Kathy Ostrand-Ponchen. I live in South Salem and I'm a member of this committee as well as the Human Rights Commission. Uh, Robert, you want to go next?
Oh, I sure will. My name is Robert Marshall. I live in Ward 2. I'm a member of the Human Rights Commission as well as the Community Engagement Committee, and I will pass it off to Hamadi.
Hello, I am Hamadi. I am the chair of the Human Rights Commission and resident of Ward 5. And I will pass it off to Marianne.
Good evening, everybody. Mary Ann Bradshaw, happy to be a guest this evening to this committee's meeting in preparation for the Western Oregon classes partnership with you. Spring term is just around the corner, believe it or not. I live in South Salem and I'm happy to be here with you this evening. Thanks for having me. Linnell, I'll pass it to you.
I'm Linnell, and I work at Safe Sleep United Women's Shelter, but this is one of my favorite committees, so I sit in as a guest whenever I can and root you on, and I'm grateful for the work you all do. I live in Northeast Salem, and I'm always excited about the discrimination survey process, so I guess it's that time of year again. Um, and I don't know who's going or not. Kate?
Yeah, I think I'm the only one left. My name is Kate Strathy. I live in Ward 1 in the Grant area, and I'm on the board as a commissioner. And I am finishing up dinner, so I'm just going to go on mute for a little bit, but I will join you as soon as I'm done with that.
Thank you, Kate. Gretchen, who are you?
You bet. Gretchen Bennett, staff liaison to the Human Rights Commission this evening. Good evening.
Well, thank you everybody for those introductions. Good to see everybody, as I already said. Let's go ahead and move on. Gretchen, have we received public comment this evening?
We have not.
And is there a motion to approve the minutes from last time we met? It's been a little funky the way we've done things the last few months, but in terms of scheduling and stuff. But
I'll
is
move
there a
to approve the
motion?
minutes.
Moved by Kathy. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Kate, as she rounds out her dinner. So that brings us to the survey. Just as Professor Bradshaw went off camera, we're going to call on her and invite her into the conversation. Sorry about that. But as a reminder, we kind of all are familiar, but there's at least two of us here who weren't on the commission at the time, though I think are more or less familiar with it. But this is one of our big annual projects that the commission does, and that this entity, the committee, helps kind of oversee cradle to grave sort of thing. And it's in partnership with the professor and her students at Western Oregon, who are graduate students in organizational psychology.
It's the Master of Organizational Leadership program.
There you go. Thank you. At Western Oregon, and they are just really wonderful, bright and dedicated students of various backgrounds who kind of bring their expertise and lend their time to help the city. And this is part of their kind of project-based learning, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm sure the professor could expand on this should she want to. But basically, what we do is we try to assess issues that are relevant to the commission, namely belonging and discrimination among residents in Salem. And we do this in a kind of a virtual format with an online form and in person. And Linnell is one of our really our great and wonderful and dedicated partners in that side of things as well, who working directly with our unhoused communities and helps really get this overrepresentation, which is really a good thing for us of our unsheltered population, and to assess belonging and discrimination in those communities. And so this helps us make decisions and prioritize our year, and it helps make better informed recommendations to council. These findings ultimately find their way to council in the form of a presentation, mostly done by our chair. And yeah, this is a big thing. This year was a little bit different in that right after we concluded our cycle, which ends in, what is it, in May, we kind of did some revisions right away and some digesting right away. And so the form that we got in our packet tonight reflects that fact. And so it's not just what went out last year, but it's actually as is and as amended in the months following the discrimination, or excuse me, the community belonging survey. Alrighty. Is that enough of a preamble?
It's great.
Alrighty. Well, welcome, Professor.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you tonight. And Joaquin, as you mentioned, we are like ahead of schedule compared to what we've been in past years. And part of the motivation, if you'll recall, last year, we attempted translations to Chuukese and Marshallese. Joaquin did such a great job in partnership with one of the students refining the Spanish translation. So we've been able to field the survey in the past in English and Spanish. And last year we got translation attempts, but got feedback from members of the Human Rights Commission that the Chuukese and Marshallese were not usable as they were, and that trying to turn those on a really quick time frame, we were already in field, it just wasn't realistic. But we said, hey, that's a really important thing to do going forward. And so we did go ahead and look at the questionnaire as fielded last year, make a few revisions, and then we have in hand already translations to Chuukese and Marshallese. So what that will enable us to do is actually to get into field a little bit sooner, because instead of starting from, hey, what should we ask? We're going to say, here's what we're going to ask this year. And we're going to ask it in English and Spanish, Chuukese and Marshallese. There's plenty of other decisions that I have questions for you tonight, and that the students will have the opportunity to discuss and make recommendations. But in terms of what are we going to ask, we have a questionnaire in hand. And, you know, tomorrow, if somebody looked at that and came back and said, oh, we really need to refine this one thing or add something, I want to make this as actionable for your committee as possible. But we are in such a good place to have a great questionnaire with translations complete. My preference would be to say, let's go forward with the questionnaire as it is. What that does raise for us, and actually Linnell and I exchanged an email earlier today, so Linnell, feel free to chime in. It brings some really important questions to the forefront around how we invite people to do the survey. We have done the last few years a very deliberate over quota of people experiencing homelessness, and we can do that again. I don't know if we're going to learn anything new, but that's a big focus of the city. There's important decisions being made. And you may say, hey, that's very actionable. Let's do that again. I would put forward to this committee, we have translations this year that we have not had in the past. And we may say, let's take that time and effort and really seek opportunities to invite primary speakers of Chuukese and Marshallese to have the opportunity to participate in the survey. And if there are things the students could do among those populations instead of the day that we've done in the past to go in person and invite people experiencing homelessness to do it. In addition, I have 14 students registered for the term, and I could say, hey, half of you go to this event and help me sit with people, and Linnell join us and sit with people experiencing homelessness and invite them to do the survey, and half of you go to this other event where we may have a culturally specific group or an activity that we feel like we may have really great attendance from those communities. I'm kind of just looking for feedback from you. How do we set up the survey this year to really give lots of opportunities for folks who might benefit from that translation being available, those 2 translations that we're adding this year for the first time, to invite their participation in the survey. So just interested in your thoughts around invitations and activities that the students could do and that you as committee members could support as we look at the kind of sample design for this year. What are your thoughts there?
Well, thank you, Marianne, for that. And I think I didn't know, at least I didn't know that we had those translations completed. So that's wonderful to hear.
And thanks to Gretchen, that's her
Yes,
work for
thank you
making
to
that
Gretchen.
happen.
And that was going to be one of the big questions that I wanted to bring to this conversation. So that's
It's
perfect.
done.
There we go. That's wonderful news. All right, I'm opening up to the floor. What are folks' thoughts around what the professor shared?
I have a couple of things. I would, as far as how to get the survey out there, I would want to check with Commissioner Leung to see if she has some events or places where we could, disseminate it to get feedback from that community. Just one thought. Now, I know you said it's done, but I did review it before the meeting and I had a couple of questions. I don't know if you want to talk about those or if you want to hold off until a little bit later.
We'll get to those momentarily,
Okay.
Kathy. I'm sure
Okay.
there are things to talk about. But I think let's address what the professor raised right now. So reaching out to Jackie, I think that's smart. What are folks' reactions around this over quota for the our unhoused neighbors and our folk experiencing homelessness in the community? Linnell, I see you unmuting.
I had emailed Marianne and Gretchen just thinking whether it's this year or next year. I feel like many people live in poverty and survival mode and just would not have the time to even know that a city is conducting a survey like this. This is like a luxury item. When you've got time in your life to look online and look at surveys that the city is asking you to do, that's a luxury. So I feel like homelessness has been a really big priority for me, and it's my heart. And I feel so grateful for the work that you all have done and the willingness to focus on homelessness for this survey. But I also worried that in a sense, we're getting the same answers year after year. The people experiencing homelessness are often experiencing discrimination almost every single day. You've been revising the survey to get better data on that. And, we learned where it's happening, and some places were places that we suspected and other places were more of a surprise. So now you have some outreach and follow-up steps to like, how do we improve that? And I've been impressed that this whole thing hasn't just been a rote exercise. You guys are analyzing the data, you're summarizing it, analyzing it, developing recommendations. And because of you all, housing status is now a protected class in Salem. And I just worried, like, who else needs that kind of focus to be able to have the marginalization that can happen to people in poverty or otherwise marginalized? How can we get them to benefit from the survey the way people experiencing homelessness have? And I kind of have two minds of like, do you want to choose a different focus, whether it's next year, since so much has already been done for this year, or, do you want to choose a different focus? And yet one piece that's kind of a ripple effect of this survey, it's besides the data that we get from the people on the streets, going out with the students, it seems like they almost always have some fears, some concerns, some myths that, maybe those homeless people are pretty dangerous, or, I might not be safe to go out there. And each year, no matter who else changes their hearts or minds, I feel like the students do. And there's a piece of me that feels like maybe just for that, we're sharing information that has more people see people who are homeless as not other, but as one of us. And maybe that in itself is worthwhile to keep going year after year. But I did worry a little bit that the focus on homelessness has been so valuable, and I've been so grateful for that. And yet a lot of the answers are being redundant, and you've acted on the things, in more than one way. So would it be fair to kind of pick a different population and give them that kind of time and attention so that whatever they're experiencing can be addressed the way you guys really tackled homelessness and did some amazingly good things? And I'm on the fence because I feel like just that experience of going out and surveying people who are experiencing homelessness, that in itself is showing more people that some of the things we often believe are not true. But is that worth it to have the whole focus continue? Or maybe it's a divide and conquer thing like Marianne proposed. So I'd be receptive to whatever direction you all prefer. And obviously if it's a different population, it would be great if you had a lead for that who is either in that population or serving that population. But if you don't have that, I'd be happy to just learn about that population and participate in doing the surveys. So that's just my background, like thoughts about it.
Thank you, Linnell. Marianne?
Thanks so much, Linnell, and thank you for all your dedication and support of the students. I definitely feel like we have, in taking students, and Linnell prepares them beautifully and supports them as they go and conduct surveys, that's very educational for them. I would say that the purpose of this project is to serve you as a committee and to serve the Human Rights Commission. And I would ask, I think really, if there's are decisions on the table that you are working on, if you are hearing from a subpopulation that you want to understand better, that really should be what guides the decision. And I do feel like, because we've done an overpopulation with people experiencing homelessness for a couple of years, I wouldn't expect this year that there would be new findings. But if a lot of the decisions and conversations that are coming to you as a body or a focus of your committee is there, I think having fresh data, it's something to bring forward to talk about, to say, again, we see that this continues to be a widespread experience. If that opportunity to say, when we conducted the survey in 2024, we see this again, if that supports the work and the decisions that the HRC is making and working towards, then sometimes having a reason to bring those findings forward again is reason enough to gather the data. So I wouldn't say, because we don't think we'll see something new, we shouldn't have an overquota there. If it's actionable for you, we should. If there's another population that you say, hey, we really want to learn more about this group, I think we could say, let's go and invite them to do the survey. And the fact that we have completed a translation to Marshallese and Cherokees, we've already said that's a population we want to hear from more. I do think we could say, I don't anticipate to have, I would need to ask the students. I don't know if I happen to have a student who speaks Marshallese or Cherokees, but I'm sure they would come to a culturally specific event and be friendly and supportive. And we have it in English and we have it in Cherokees and Marshallese and Spanish. And here's an opportunity to do this. So I think really the question is, what are the decisions that the Human Rights Commission and that you as the Community Engagement Committee are working on, and what types of populations, as we're looking to split the data, will be most actionable for you to have that data you can talk about.
Robert, Kate, Hamadi.
So, Hamadi here. I would just say that just my um, overall sprinkling of the conversation, I would say that since we already have everything pretty much set to go for this year, that we should just proceed. And then if we decide for the next one that we really want to get specific in other communities or transition it into something different, or at least a different look, different package, that would be something that would be better set for going forward. And then I'll leave it there, and I'd be curious to see what everyone else had to say. And I am currently writing as we're talking. So
Thank you, Hamadi.
Go
Yeah,
ahead,
I'm
Rob.
gonna weigh in here for a little bit. This is Robert, for those that can't see me, and I apologize, I'm a little off mark. I got the packet information late, and I was trying to dig through it. Apparently, my enterprise system was flagging Gretchen's emails as junk, so I'll be correcting that in the near future. But the way I kind of interpreted, kind of like Linnell's comments was, more or less, kind of an accessibility issue, and making sure that we're kind of reaching a broader population of people and everything experiencing poverty in the Salem area, and encouraging them to do the survey. I guess my question is the survey only a handwritten paper format, or is there is there a digital version of it?
Thank you, Robert. Yes, there is a digital version of it. And more than that, the digital version of it is a branching questionnaire. So if you notice that there are certain questions that, answers that could apply to answer options that apply to multiple different kinds of questions, right? So if I say that I experience discrimination on the basis of my gender, race, and disability, then the ins and outs of that, the wheres and the hows of that branch for each of those three different categories per form completer. If that also, so it's also varies in length as well.
If I could add, the digital version is the primary version. So we
Okay.
program it into Qualtrics, which with the translations, it's really cool because you can toggle on any question between the languages. So I can look at a question in English, read it in Spanish, go back to English. And because of the branching capabilities, it's really great. And you can check, and then that will influence what questions you see. When we have gone out with the students to invite people who are experiencing homelessness to complete the survey, we take a hard copy form so that someone can just have a conversation. I can sit next to them, in the Arches parking lot or in the park and kind of read, or they can look on. We can hand them a clipboard, however they prefer to do it. I know, Linnell, you've had some folks that will sit with the electronic version. At Safe Sleep, she would just say, hey, we'll just click through it together sometimes. So it primarily is digital, but we have added the hard copy in English. Although last year we did have some conversations on the street in Spanish. So that allows the branching and the programming features of Qualtrics to really help us. And it does mean that the distribution is primarily electronic. So we use the City of Salem Facebook page, and we'll send the link to organizations and invite them to email it to their member lists. And the Human Rights Commission has been really supportive there because you have relationships as an organization to a lot of local chapters of different groups. And I know you've sent, hey, can you send this link to your member list? So a lot of the surveys go out with electronic invitations and links to the survey to complete.
Awesome. That also answered a lot of my other questions, because I think I think the big thing is really kind of encouraging a lot of our community partners, so to speak, to advertise that the community belonging survey is happening, as well as encouraging them to sit down with their individuals. Like a lot of our social service organizations and everything, case managers, like trying to encourage those folks. And I think if we could maybe somehow, and maybe it already like exists, but like a kind of a one pager that speaks to like the significance of the community belonging survey, maybe including some data that was pulled from it last year, and then some actions items that we've done moving forward, I think might encourage more people to do it. Because I think a lot of times when people see it, and especially if we're talking about kind of service providers are like, oh, that's another survey you want me to fill out with a client, and the data is going to go nowhere. But I think if we can show that hey, you've taken this 15 minutes with this individual that you're working with, is going to allow us to take some meaningful, actionable steps in the future, might encourage some people to do it. Another thing, in addition to just encouraging organizations to share on their Facebook page, is also asking them if there's a way that they could add the link to the survey as a banner on top of their web page. So as like people navigate to like, I'll just use Community Action Agency for example. Like if they would agree to put it as a banner on top of there, then we could navigate people to like as people navigate to like the MWCA website, like the banner and the link and everything to conduct like the short survey is already there. And I think just trying to get the link into more places that are not just social media. Social media is a good outlet, but I think if we can find a way to share that resource wider than that, especially amongst organizations that serve those experiencing poverty, I think might, as Linnell said, I think target, there's a lot of more people living in poverty that experience discrimination aside from just those that are homeless. So those are just some of my examples. I mean, I'm definitely happy and everything as we, like roll this out and everything to, share with some of the people and everything I work with. I'm definitely, I'd definitely be interested in everything exploring. I know that Community Action Agency, for their employees, they do a monthly, like kind of like a monthly all hands. And I'd definitely be, I could definitely share the information there, which encompasses employees from all the different programs within Community Action Agency. And so I could definitely commit to doing some targeted sharing of this within that organization. But,
Fabulous. We'll take you up on that for sure.
please do.
So I think Robert has drifted us and taken us to the right direction. But before we do that, in terms of outreach and stuff like that, let's go back to the professor's question at hand, which is communities that we can or want to prioritize. My instinct is as follows. I think it is important for the commission to have long-term data on our unhoused community, and I think that given the nature of just the challenges that the city tackles with on a week-to-week basis, and this commission, by extension, as it relates to the community, doubles as a good reason to continue our focus on that community. So I think the question then becomes, do we want it to be an over quota? If we have 14 students, do we want all 14 students going out into that community and doing that targeted outreach? And I think the question to that is probably no. And I say that because as successful as our outreach has been in that community, and deservedly so, and Linnell generously kind of indicated the ways in which that's resulted in positive changes for the community and for the city. We have been lacking or struggled to deliver another outreach to other communities. And I think in particular, the Spanish language version and the Chuukese version and the Marshallese language version are wonderful advances and welcome advances. I don't know about Chuukese and Marshallese speaking communities, but at least the Spanish speaking community, there's some significant, or at least not insignificant, portion of the population that may be certainly Spanish dominant, but their literacy may be variable. And so being able to have targeted outreach, that is to say that they speak Spanish as their main language, but maybe can't read or write in Spanish. And so having very specific and targeted outreach in our minority language communities would be important for us to do when we're thinking about how to spend our time and resources. And so I think I wouldn't be in favor of kind of suspending our targeted outreach of our unhoused community, but increasing our target outreach of our other communities that we're really interested in hearing from and have already kind of invested time and energy into getting materials for. Which also leads me to ask Professor, and I see your hand, Kate. What is the possibility of having an extended period, response period? Because if I remember from last year, it was less than I thought it might be, and that I think was if my memory serves, that was a product of us really doing. We did a lot for those who weren't here. We did a lot of changes last year. Not just cosmetic ones like the name, but like really material changes around the questions and all that stuff. But I think we ended up having maybe 10 days, a week and a half, maybe.
Yeah. I think the goal last year was 2 weeks, but it really was only 10 days.
Yeah. So I'd be interested in at least having, if possible, Marianne, those 2 weeks. I think we're well positioned to meet that, given where we are. But at least those 2 weeks. I just wanted to say that before we lost that thread.
I'll chime in on that thread. I think because we have the questionnaire very close and we have 3 translations complete, I think to say, let's target 3 weeks in field. I wanted to have this conversation tonight before I mapped things out. So we have flexibility. And I mean, I think we could target a 3-week window this year, and that would really increase the opportunity to get the word out. Robert, like you're talking about, to say to case managers, hey, as you're meeting with people, I think we could look at community events. I liked your phrase, your focus, Joaquin, around minority language community groups, and to say, I don't require any student to go out in person. I give options. So we may not have all 14 who say, yes, I want to do that, and that fits in my schedule in my life. But if I said, here are 3 events, you're encouraged to pick one. And maybe it's Linnell, you and I go out one day with the students who choose that to sit with folks experiencing homelessness. And maybe there is an event with the Spanish speaking community and an event with the South Pacific community, and that we looked at inviting students. And I'm happy to attend 3 events and to give, but we would need to find ideally an event that was already happening in those communities that students could come to. So having a bigger window might give us more dates to choose from, things that might already be happening in the community, but we do have some timeline flexibility.
Thank you for that. Linnell, I know your hand popped up, but Kate, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I completely agree that it should be a longer lead time on surveys. And by the way, Marianne, I think I took your class at Willamette.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so nice to see you. Hi, Kate.
I know. Sorry, I'm not.
Was it Caitlin? I'm trying to connect you.
Yeah.
But we know each other from Willamette years long past.
Well, we're all about making connections here in Salem. So.
I took a marketing research class with her. But I think that Joaquin, you know, in our Human Rights Commission, we've talked about what it takes to be a sanctuary city. And going back to Marianne's original question, what are the objectives for this year? If we're looking at objectives around sanctuary cities, then I completely agree with you, Joaquin, that we should be kind of focusing some of the research on that community, right? Like the community of immigrants and people who aren't, English isn't their first language, right? Whatever that looks like. It's not just Spanish speaking, but there's plenty of people who have come from all over who've come to Salem. And so and it keeps growing, right? It's amazing and it's fantastic. So I think we should kind of broaden that horizon and focus a little bit broader than just the unhoused population. So that was the one thing I just wanted to say to kind of back you up on that. I definitely think 2 weeks or 10 days is just way too short. And Marianne probably taught me that, but I also, you know, work in communications, and people just will not take a survey in like 10 days at my work. That definitely would have to take like a month, and then they would take it at the last minute. So what I was going to say also is just, I think the onus also falls on some of us as commissioners. And I know we'll talk about this a little later, but the liaison program that we've been talking about, like we also can reach out to organizations that we work with. And I know Robert just talked about that, but all of us can reach out, and just any organization in Salem that we have connections with, we can all say, hey, this is coming, even giving them a heads up a month before so people know to put it in a newsletter. I think that would be really helpful, because some organizations, I think of like Center for Hope and Safety, for example, they do newsletters almost every month. They just have to plan for what would go into that. So we have to be understanding of like, what are their communications like? And then how do we fit those things? How do we fit a plug for the community belonging survey into communications for all these organizations, and help them out with that? So I would just maybe, even if we had a link to that Qualtrics survey a little early, if we could give it to our partner orgs earlier, I think that would be really helpful.
I agree, Kate. I'll give you an example. Last time when it came time to reach out to some of the the farm worker movement, it just, the schedules didn't line up. Their outreach didn't line up a far window, didn't line up with when the Spanish language version was ready, when all that stuff. And so some of those problems are not relevant anymore. We have the Spanish language version. It looks like we're getting ready for a larger runway for this, and so, or longer runway for this. So, but yes, very important to be proactive and intentional and consistent, not just doing it once and say, here's the survey, get it back to us in a month, but maybe even a couple of follow-up for our respective partners. Linnell is muted.
Thank you. I love what everyone's saying, and I agree that outreach to other underrepresented and probably marginalized populations would be really good. I think Robert's got an amazing connection, because so many pieces of community action serve people who are living in poverty. So I think that's a really amazing connection. I totally agree with Marianne that the focus or the hyper focus needs to be determined by this group as far as what information they need to try to have more inclusiveness and belonging in Salem. And yet I also feel like anyone who participates in doing that outreach and talking to people and helping them complete the survey, whether it's in paper or online, you're going to have more connection. You're going to humanize the people, whether it's immigrants, people experiencing homelessness, or someone else. And I feel like that is another result of the work you do by having some students and some people actually doing the surveys It builds connections and breaks some of the myths that each of us might also believe in. So I guess I wish that we also perceive the actual doing of the survey, the people who are doing the survey, is building some of the very connections you're wishing to build. And that's an accomplishment that might be a ripple, but I think it's a really important one, because now, you know, as you do these things, I think some of the students who went out and spoke with people experiencing homelessness are no longer afraid and are probably ambassadors now, speaking up for people who are homelessness. You've changed the world, but just by having some people participate. So if we did have 3 weeks, I would love it if the students chose to like come out and do some surveys of people experiencing homelessness, and also whatever other populations you choose to focus on. If they can do all 2 or all 3, you're going to build ambassadors and people who have their own hearts and minds changed and create more unity and less divisiveness just by people participating and doing the surveys. So I would wish that, you know, the students would, if they have the time in their lives, still choose homelessness if that's still going to be one of the focuses, and also because you're building connection, humanity, and creating ambassadors out into the world that are going to be promoting the very values you stand for.
I think that's very well put, Linnell, and a good reminder of what just having conversations does. Marianne mentioned the 3 weeks, 3 in-person events thing. Doesn't have to be that, but I think that's a good working model, right? I mean, we have essentially 4 languages: English, Spanish, Chuukese, Marshallese, but we have really 3 target populations, which is the Micronesian community, Spanish-speaking community, and our community of folks experiencing houselessness. And so, you know, those are 3 opportunities, volunteers they may be, Marianne, for your students who may do more than one. I mean, I would imagine you have some pretty ambitious, proactive students, and so I think, you know, trying to find those 3 opportunities. Be the first to admit that I'm not an expert in the Micronesian community here in the Willamette Valley, and I know that Jackie, Commissioner Leung, is, and I think she might be even the executive director of a Micronesian CBO, and so it'd be important to really involve her in that process in ways that I don't think any of us here maybe are prepared to do, and so she would be the contact to explore at least that option. And you know, we have Linnell, with whom we have a really wonderful history, and Robert, who's new to this group, who have their expertise, and Gretchen, for that matter, you know, and of course those of us who are here who know the Latino community and the migrant community as well. Happy to serve as those bridges. Marianne, are there any other questions that you came here and wanted to answer that we haven't addressed yet?
Yes. I do want to just make sure as we kind of switch gears on this same topic. Joaquin, I love what you laid out with some important contacts. Gretchen, would next steps be just to reach out to Commissioner Leung? I would really benefit if those of you on the call that have contacts, if you could say, oh, here's an idea of an event students could go to, or here's something in the Micronesian community they could come and then stay after. People could be invited to participate in surveys, or a Spanish language community. I feel like you all are so well connected that I would love to benefit from your contacts and helping find opportunities for those things. Is that something people on this call could help me with?
Absolutely. And I think if you haven't already, you should be in contact with Jackie in particular. But I guess my question for you, Marianne, would be, what are the dates that we're really targeting or shooting for right now?
Great. So one thing to mark on your calendar, the class next term, the first class is April 3rd. I'm doing class Wednesday evening, 7:30 to 9:20 on Zoom. And it is the second class. So actually mark your calendars for April the 10th, 7:30 to 8:30. You are invited to come to class. And this is something some of you have done before, where you've come to class, introduced yourself, shared a little bit about the Human Rights Commission, about the Community Engagement Committee, the history of the survey, and given the students the opportunity to ask some questions about how it's been actionable in the past, what your hopes and objectives are for this term. And I would invite you all to come that evening on Zoom. I will send an email to Gretchen that she can get out to you, but that's Wednesday, April 10th, 7:30 to 8:30. And then the term runs for 10 weeks, and very conveniently, just in the week when it is finals, in my class for this content matter, instead of giving them an exam, they do a presentation. And that presentation happens to fall the week in June of a Human Rights Commission meeting, which is, Gretchen, help me if I'm wrong, I have in mind June 12th, and I think
Yes.
that's at 6 p.m.
Yes.
And I think we're already on the agenda. So
Yes.
the students haven't even shown up for class yet, and I've already signed them up to give a presentation. But that kind of bookends the project. Some of you, or all of you, are invited to show up on April the 10th and say, here's what we're hoping to learn. And then the students come to the meeting on June 12th. What that means is that we want to be in field for 3-ish weeks. And as I kind of mess around with some dates, especially if there's an event here or there, but to get that 3-week window, and hopefully to have the links that we can start getting out before the survey actually goes live. But, call it April 20th to May 10th, April 25th to May 15th, somewhere in there, that the survey would be live. So there's some, between now and April 3rd, ideally we finalize the syllabus and say to the students, here's our timeline, let's go.
Yeah.
So does that answer your timeline question?
It does. And
Awesome.
it runs conveniently through May Day, which is a huge organizing event here in Salem for our migrant community.
Perfect.
May 1st.
I planned that. Okay.
I think the international socialists planned that in the 70s, but yeah, we'll go with that. Gretchen, you have your hand up, and thank you, Marianne, for that context.
Yeah, unless there's commissioners here tonight who want to do this, I don't want to step on your toes. I'd be happy to reach people and organizations that I know in our Islander communities and engage conversation about how to get the survey out. And in particular, are there any gatherings, groups, events in this time span? And Marianne, I can get you that information.
That'll be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't really have any connections in the Micronesian community and things, but I do have connections in some of the other, especially like with NAACP and Be Black Leadership Foundation and stuff like that, that I would be willing to reach out and see if we can get better inclusion from those groups as well.
And if I may, Hamadi, I was thinking about mentioning that, when I think about that question of what are we chewing on and talking about, I remember those conversations a couple of meetings ago where we were noticing the impact of hate and bias crime on people, our Black and African American neighbors. And that just also seems like an important conversation we were having. And so I feel like that outreach should be really critical.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely. I was actually thinking that as we were sitting here, because if I remember correctly from last year, it doesn't seem like we had a very good participation in those groups. So I wanted to make that a focus this year for sure.
Thank you. It'd be great. So I came tonight wanting to ask questions about what you're hoping to learn, who we want to really reach out to was the big one, get those dates on your calendar. And then if there are thoughts, comments, and Kathy, I know you mentioned you have some feedback on the questionnaire. If we have things we want to do to refine that, the sooner we refine it, the better.
All right, Kathy, I think she was teeing you up.
Well, maybe it's just a function of, I know I've seen this before, but when I was scrolling through it before this meeting, we start with the questions about others. How have you witnessed or heard about someone else experiencing discrimination? what type of discrimination, how often, and then where. And then when it gets to the all about you, it says, have you in the past, so question 8, in the past 12 months, have you personally experienced discrimination? Yes or no? Question 9, what type of discrimination? And then question 10 and 11 are specific to housing status. And I don't see that we're asking how often and where for not specific to housing status, but maybe, so I wanted to run that by you, Marianne, and see if I'm looking at it wrong or.
This is a branching thing, but Marianne, go ahead.
So what you are noticing, and you're exactly correct, is that the version you have is the hard copy version.
Mhm.
So when we went out in the field, we used this version because we were specifically sitting with people experiencing houselessness.
Yeah.
And so we didn't want to ask the question about every single type, or it would just take so long in person.
Okay.
So we did ask those 2 questions specifically about discrimination around housing status. When that same version of the questionnaire was taken online and we were able to build the whole branch out, those questions were asked, that pair of questions, how often and where, was asked for any type of discrimination that was marked. So for some people it was 1, for some people it was 3, for some people it was 10. But you are correct that what you had in mind is how it happened online, and what you're looking at is how it happened in person with hard copy.
Okay, I was assuming it was something like that, but I just wanted to make sure.
I'm glad you asked.
And there were a couple of things. I don't know if this is still going to be like if you're going to go through and do some editing, but for example, under where did it go? Question 7, where it asks in what places or situations, it's got community-based service provider and government office or agency. I think that there should probably be a second bullet there, but they're just jumbled together. Are you looking at it?
I am taking notes, but I don't have it in front of me.
Okay, so I just think that there's missing a bullet or a hard return between those
Formatting
2.
error, it looks like, yeah.
Yeah.
Easy to fix. Yep. Thanks for
Yeah,
calling that out. Needs a bullet. Got it.
And there's a couple other things that I might suggest we talk more about maybe for next year, but I don't, especially if we've already got the translations, I don't want to mess too much with it, but I can mention them or just save them for
mention them, Kathy,
for later. So when I was looking at it, on the questions that ask about what type of discrimination and where we separate gender and gender identity, the more I thought about it, I think that maybe those should be combined, or it's a question, I guess, but that I think that's maybe a bigger discussion. Because we combine, where am I looking? Yeah, I guess my question, I see Robert has his hand raised for that, but.
Wait, I'm sorry, before Robert jumps in, Kathy, are you talking about question 19?
I'm looking at 5.
Oh, I'm sorry.
5 and 9. So it's what types of discrimination have you personally experienced in Salem, Oregon?
Oh, I see. Okay.
Now it's age, race, color, national origin, language, gender, and then gender identity are 2 separate ones. And I just wonder if they really are separate.
So sorry, Robert, I'm not stalling you, but Gretchen, we had this conversation, and Kelsey,
Okay.
jump in here. Somebody said something.
Okay.
Someone who has a better memory than me to remind me what happened.
I can jump in. They are split that way because what was his name? Mike, Gretchen.
Oh, that's right.
He felt very strongly about having them separate. And then
Yeah.
last year, as the conversation came up again, Kelsey reaffirmed
Okay.
they need to be separate. And I would say the 2 of them know more about that than I do. And I'm happy to go with their recommendations there. But that is a big list. And it is a list that we should revisit. And if language needs to be updated or a type of discrimination needs to be added, I am open to revisiting that. I do feel like we have been advised from people who know to keep those separate.
And so, Marianne, that also the length of the list prompts me to say the following, which is the 2 other items that we should discuss or just name here is separating mental and physical disability. That was something that I felt really passionately about. So I think those are, though there is a continuum of disability experience, I feel like those 2 are different in material ways for folks, both as do people discriminating against folks, but also people who are living those experiences. And then the other one, which is I think the odd one out in one way or another, is the weight or body type. And the inclusion of that, though it is not a protected class in Salem, is because when in previous years folks had listed types of discrimination, weight and body type was often in the other category that folks were offering again and again and again and again. And so we wanted to be responsive to that and include that in the list.
Yeah, so they were typing it in.
Exactly. So I just share that in case anyone has any, in anticipation of any other questions folks may have about that list in particular. Robert, go ahead. Ask a question, struggles with the
Okay,
list.
there we go. As I ride the struggle bus hard. I was gonna point out something in regards to question 7, in the what places or situations have you witnessed or heard about discrimination? Under housing, we might, if possible, maybe explore adding housing/shelter, and then changing the examples to finding housing/shelter, retaining housing/shelter, and then getting necessary housing repairs. And I think right now, just reading anything, it doesn't really, to me, anything, I wouldn't necessarily feel that shelter fits into community-based service provider. I feel like shelter and anything would typically fall kind of down there in the housing piece of it. But if we don't specify sheltering, people might not know that they should respond to that response. So,
Yeah, great.
I had one comment, just it was 3A, and it goes back to what Kathy said. Like, I don't think there would, if we were to adjust it, I wouldn't change it this year. But I think that the term like someone like me is a little vague, and I don't know if that was intentional. But I think if it were to be adjusted to be a little bit more specific, it could be like someone in my demographic, and then they would explain that demographic further later on in the survey. But when I was reading it, the reason why that like resonated with me was because I did volunteer with CHS, Center for Hope and Safety, last year. They do extensive trauma training, and I was thinking, ooh, that could be kind of a trauma cue for someone who has had microaggressions consistently, right? Like when they're constantly othered or constantly put into another group, and to just say like, oh, someone like you, I was like, oh, someone read that the wrong way. I just felt like that could be taken to, in the wrong, when you're reading it, maybe in the wrong phrasing. So I would maybe just be more specific if we could in like future years, but I wasn't sure if that was intentional.
So Kate, I appreciate the thoughtfulness of that comment. I have a question for you to clarify what you're saying. My sense of, if it were to read someone of my demographic, the question then ultimately immediately becomes, what's my demographic? Not to get all Whitman-esque on us, but we contain multitudes and there's many demographics. So I guess what would be your workaround or your reaction to that question?
So it's Salem is a welcoming community for someone like me, is how it's phrased right now.
Yep.
And then they're kind of agreeing with it on like a Likert scale. I believe it's hard to like pull this up and read that at the same time, but
Right.
I think we would just have to look at the phrasing of how we could just adjust that portion. Maybe, I guess it's like, because people do contain multitudes. So I'm like, what part of is as a woman, or as like a white woman, or as a white woman who lives in the Grant district, or, like it kind of is a question where I'm like, what part of someone like me am I responding to, So I just felt it was a little vague, but again, I don't think it needs to be changed. I think that if people are responding to it, then it already is a functional question. It doesn't need to be adjusted or changed this year. Just something to consider for next year.
I think it's really important to consider. We wanted it to be a general question to kind of have an overall, like, what's your experience? And demographic, actually, we did throw around, but we weren't sure how people would respond to that. Or like Joaquin says, if then you're like, oh, well, what is my demographic? But I wonder if it could be like, I experience Salem to be a welcoming community. And then it's saying that's my experience. And we're not worrying about, someone like me or my demographic. It's just my experience.
Yeah, that might fix it. It's just more active versus passive phrasing might fix the issue.
Yeah. And I think to go back to the translators on one phrase maybe would not be too big of an ask.
Yeah.
Agreed.
How do people feel about I experience Salem as a welcoming? Oh, it gets a little tricky. I might have to put a few things down in writing. But we could look at, instead of Salem is a welcoming community for someone like me, to have I experience Salem as a welcoming place, or my experiences. I feel I like experience. I'm gonna noodle on it.
Well, as a translator, I can tell you it's no problem to change that. And we'll be okay. As one of the designated translators. No
Great.
problem.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Marianne. Any other comments? Also mindful of time. We only have 4 minutes left.
It's another minor comment, but let's see, let me find it on here. Questions. So it's quite question 7 and question 11. The responses match. So whatever changes are made to the one. Most of the options. So this is where, in what places or situations, and most of them are the singulars, like business, healthcare setting, and then we get to places of worship, and it's places of worship, and I would just make that place of worship. I don't know, because to me it's like, well, I haven't experienced it in multiple places of worship, but maybe I don't know. It just as I was reading through it, it's a simple change, but again, it's a very small one. It's not gonna. I don't think it's gonna make a huge difference one way or the other.
It's good for consistency.
Yep, I like it. Noted.
Now, the plural singular difference may be hard for the translator, but I don't know.
I can probably just take care of that one for you.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
But the Chukis and Marshallies, I'll have
Yeah,
that.
I don't know about them. I won't be able to vouch for them.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Kathy.
That's great.
So this question 20, how do you describe your race ethnicity? Please select the one you most identify with, and then there are multiple options, and then it gets to bi or multiracial. Would there be benefit to having a blank for them to fill in?
So on the online version, the next question was tell us anything else you'd like to about your race or ethnicity. So there was an option to expand online.
Okay.
As they wanted.
Okay. I just the way it reads, like you have to choose one, and then it's not until the end of the list that there's options for. Okay. No, if as long as there's something a little more expansive online, I'm fine with that.
I think you're absolutely right, Kathy, though, because the biracial, the multiracial is almost kind of defeatist because it tells you something but doesn't tell you anything at the same time. It's just like, okay, well. And so then for example, myself, I'm a biracial person, I'd have to be like, well, which one do I want to claim? If I want to be legible in any way, that's kind of a hard choice. Or maybe not a hard choice, depending on who you are. But that's a good point, Kathy. Anything else?
So if we research or reach out to groups, we want to have that done before middle of April, and do we let Gretchen and Marianne know if we come up with anything, or what's your preference there?
So first of all, let me just acknowledge for the agenda, we're gonna table the dashboard update just because I can't be egregious in running us over. I have a habit of doing that. I'm not gonna do that tonight. So I have another commitment tonight, actually, so I can't do that. So it's for selfish reasons. But maybe we'll braid in the liaison conversation a little bit here, Kathy, to the extent that we have a list of potential community partners, Marianne, that we're trying to be more intentional about reaching out to, and maybe even having some kind of monthly report in for the commission for folks when they go out to the community and visit with these CBOs or other organizations, whatever they may be. So to your point, Kathy, you know, I think for those of us who can and are interested, to compile a list of people that are organizations that maybe we're accountable for or that are a high priority for the commission to reach out to as it relates to this survey. And then while we do that, if language doesn't already exist, Gretchen, not to ask you to do something, but maybe an outreach email that can come from us or from you or some combination of us and you and the professor to also be drafted while we're figuring out who we want to reach out to or who we can reach out to, so that come early, mid-April, when we come back together in conversation, there's no back and forth. We're just ready to do the outreach. Does that sound viable?
Yes. Happy to put something like that together.
Thank you. Professor, does that work for you?
It's fabulous. Yep. And I can get Gretchen links. So as you're doing outreach, you just have, here's all the information needed to invite people to do the survey.
That would be awesome. So for the 10th, I would love either now or in the immediate future a volunteer. I'm going to be on an airplane on that date and time, and I'm the one who I think maybe someone else went too, but I was the one who went last year and talked to the class about it, and I really enjoyed that. But hard to do that from a plane. I'm flying back from a conference in New York, so I got to come back to Oregon. But so if anyone else is interested, reach
I
out.
unfortunately have made another commitment since our Human Rights Commission meeting got rescheduled to the following week. I filled it up with something else. So
There you go. Well, we'll figure it out, Marianne. We will do that on our end, but I just want to let you know it won't be me that night.
No worries.
Any other questions from you in particular? You being you, Marianne.
Mostly just a thank you. I really appreciate the effort and time and energy it takes to do this and support the students in their learning. And you guys are just it's a great partnership. So I really appreciate your energy for this project. Thank you.
Well, the thanks are ours to extend to you and your students. We really value this partnership and this relationship, and I don't think it's an overstatement to say that you're doing your city a service, and we really appreciate you and the work that your classroom does, and especially you, Linnell, as well, for all the energy that you bring to this every time, and so we're grateful for you. Well, there are other exciting things to talk about, but I'll have to just have you waiting with bated breath for next time. But we welcome you again next month to continue the conversation.